Learn how you can use dbt to accelerate your development with SQL Database and Fabric, as well as Fabric data warehouses, as well as the SQL Analytics endpoint. You'll learn all about it, some gotchas, and tips and tricks for getting started. This week on Data Exposed MVP Edition. Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to the episode of Data Exposed MVP Edition. Today, I'm joined by Nandan. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thank you, Anna, for this opportunity. I am Nandan Hedge, based in India. I work as a data architect in my current organization. I am a 2 times Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a Microsoft Fabric super user, focusing on majorly Azure Data Platform and Microsoft Fabric.
Awesome. Cool. Well, it's great to have you here. And I'm excited for this episode because it's on a topic that I don't know much about. And the title is very cleverly named FABRICate SQL Database with DBT. And I'd love to just learn a little bit more from your perspective before we get into the details. Like, what is SQL Database in Fabric? What's it good for in your perspective as an MVP? And then kind of how does DBT play into all of this?
Okay. So before we move into the Fabric SQL database, let's cover a basic introductory about what is Microsoft Fabric. So Microsoft Fabric is basically a software as a service introduced by Microsoft, which is an all-in-one analytics solution for enterprises that covers everything from the data movement to the data science, real-time analytics, and business intelligence. Now, SQL database in Microsoft Fabric was recently, during last November, released into public preview. It is basically a developer-friendly transactional database equivalent in the Microsoft Fabric world, based on the Azure SQL Database itself, that allows one to easily create an operational database in Microsoft Fabric. Now, the SQL database in Fabric uses the same SQL database engine as the PaaS equivalent, that is Azure SQL Database. So one can consider that it's a transactional database equivalent for operational purposes in the Microsoft Fabric world. Now, the counterpart, that is DBT. Now, the DBT stands for Data Build Tool. It's an open source Python software tool that enables data analysts and data engineers to transform and model the data in the respective data warehouse. Now, the data warehouse terminology here is a generic one. It can be any destination or sink across any platform that supports the concept of structured data warehousing. It can include our Microsoft SQL Server across on-premises or infrastructure as a service, our Azure SQL databases, Synapse, Fabric SQL Warehouse, and even Fabric SQL Database. So, DBT enables analytical engineers to transform the data in their warehouses by writing simple select statements and turns the select statement into the respective tables and views. So one can consider that it simplifies the ETL or the ELT process by focusing the T part, the transformation, and integrates seamlessly with modern cloud-based data platform.
That sounds great. I'd love to see it kind of in action if you have something to show us.
Yes. Now, since DBT is an open source Python software and it's a command, so DBT has two versions. One is a command line version and another is a cloud version. Now in this demo, we would be seeing the command line version of it. Since it's a command line version and a Python open source software, it acts as an infrastructure as a service. Hence, one of the prerequisites is for me to have Python installed within the server via which I'm executing the DBT command. So, I already have Python installed within my server. Now, in order to install DBT, I have to execute one command, which is the normal command to install any Python packages. That is pip install dbt-SQL server. Now, as I stated, by the time this is getting executed, let's get across some background aspect. DBT has multiple types of adapters corresponding to the respective sink which we are considering as the warehouse. It can be in the Microsoft ecosystem, it can be a Microsoft SQL Server, Fabric, Azure Synapse. But outside Microsoft ecosystem, we can also consider Snowflake, Databricks, GCP. Hence, corresponding to the respective destination, DBT has different types of packages. Since we are focused more towards the Fabric SQL database, hence we installed dbt-the SQL Server adapter. Now let's check whether all the corresponding dependencies got installed or not. So for that, we have the piplist command that would state that, okay, I have installed the dbt adapters. Along with that, the dbt SQL Server adapter and all its corresponding dependencies. Now, as dbt is an open source tool, it follows a pattern. So here, I have set up or installed, I have cloned a Git repository that contains the respective structure in which one expects to execute the command. Now, one of the main file that acts as a config file for the dbt adapter is the project.yml file. So before moving to the actual execution, let's get a little bit about the file. So within this project.yml file, basically we are defining that anything that is within the models folder should be executed as the model path. Seeds folder should be considered as the seed path. And for dbt also serves certain aspects like automated unit testing. So in order for test execution, dbt has to come and search in the test folder equivalent of the corresponding folder. So let's proceed with the execution. Since this is the location wherein I have all the folders for the corresponding execution present, I need to update the directory of my PowerShell command line to that path. So I'll be executing the change directory command. Now we are within the folder location that hosts all the files which we need to execute via dbt. Now the first command is we need to establish a connection to our destination, that is the Fabric SQL database. So for that, the command is dbt debug command. Now that tries to create a connection with a destination on which you want to execute our necessary .SQL queries. Now what this does is, it goes across this location and checks for the profiles.yml file that is present within this location. Now, in that profiles.yml file, it checks for the corresponding server database detail and the corresponding authentication types. So in our demo, we have taken the service principal authentication to establish a connection to the Fabric SQL database. And this states that we were able to successfully establish the connection to the Fabric SQL database.
Nice. Awesome. This seems pretty straightforward to get set up, which is great. One quick question is what other types of authentication types are supported for Fabric SQL Database?
So now the dbt SQL Server adapter that we installed supports different types of authentication as it supports different databases within Microsoft ecosystem. It can be Microsoft SQL Server across on-premises and IaaS, Azure SQL databases, and even Fabric SQL database. Now, since it supports this set of databases, it supports multiple types of authentications, which can be Windows authentication, SQL Server authentication, Active Directory. But since Microsoft Fabric is a cloud SaaS aspect, it does not support Windows or software SQL authentication. So the only authentications that are supported is Active Directory username and password, assuming the username and password have MFA disabled, Azure CLI authentication, and service principal authentication.
Nice. Makes sense. And service principal is what you used here.
Correct. So this I can check in the corresponding execution aspect, wherein I have provided the respective client ID and the Active Directory service principal authentication. Now we were able to successfully establish the connection with the uh, Fabric SQL database. Now, before I proceed with the next command, earlier you might have seen that, okay, let me delete this logs section, folder section, correct? Now, let me execute a command called dbt seed. Now, what it does is, dbt is a tool for analytical team who are not familiar with major integration tools. For them, in case if they want to analyze certain master data, or if they want to ingest certain master data within the database ecosystem without having the dependency on the data engineers and assuming that data is a non-sensitive data, correct? What they can do is they can upload or they can create a file within the folder as master data files, and then a simple command called dbt seed would ensure that all those files get converted as a table within the respective destination, and the data within those files are automatically loaded.
Nice.
So before I execute it, let's go and see the Fabric SQL database. Now, this database is an empty database. Now let me go and execute the command dbt seed. That would ensure that the master data files that are present within the seed folder would get converted into tables within the respective database, and the corresponding data within those files would also be inserted within those tables. So that's the power of dbt, which enables analytical team to work on their own for exploratory data analytical purpose. Now once I executed the dbt seed command, a logs folder automatically got created. So let's check what does the log file contain. So the log file initially, since we established the connection to the Fabric SQL database, it provides the authentication type that was used, and it was a successful connection. Now, post that, we executed the dbt seed command. Now with the dbt seed command, it initially checks whether the table is already present in the respective destination or not, based on the information schema or the metadata within the respective database. And then, depending on that, it creates the necessary SQL scripts at the backend, like create table, and
Nice.
post that, it automatically creates scripts to insert the data into the respective tables. Now, since this is a log file, it masks all the data that was present within that in the log file.
Nice.
So now let's go and check our Fabric SQL database. So let me go and refresh the tables section, and voila, we are able to see there are 3 tables corresponding to the 3 files that were created, and
Nice.
those do contain the necessary data within that. So now let me execute the dbt seed command again. Let's check what happens.
I
Now
see.
since
So maybe we would guess that it would skip this because it would see that it was already there, right? Or
it would skip the table creation because the table is already present. But imagine if someone had updated certain records within the seed file, correct? So what it does is, via the metadata, it checks whether the table is already present. Since the table is already present, let me close the log file and reopen that. Since the table is already present, what it would do is, and since this is an incremental log file,
uh-huh.
so since this was late, it contains all the previous records until unless we have explicitly deleted that log file. Correct? Now, what it would do is, it would check whether the table is already present or not via the information schema. Correct? Since the table was already present, it would truncate the table.
Ah,
and then it would again insert the record, because DBT tool does not know, correct, whether there have been any changes made within the
Right.
existing file or not.
Right.
Then coming to the next major command, that is the dbt run. Now, the main purpose of dbt is to convert the SQL statements into the respective tables or views within the destinations. So here I have a .sql file that I'll open within the Visual Studio. Now, what does that .sql file contain? It contains the respective logic that the respective transformation that I want to convert into my destination as either a table or a view. Now I see that there are different types of different SQL statements. So in which order does it really execute? So for that, basically what dbt does, it creates a directed acyclic graph at the backend, wherein it creates all the dependencies within one another, and then once we execute the dbt run command, it connects those dependencies and executes them in the sequential order in which the dependencies are present. So now
Nice.
the dbt run command is initially converting the first three objects into a view, since those are present within the staging folder. Now, why did it convert the objects that are present within the staging folder into the view, and the outside objects, that is customer and orders, as a table, and inserted the necessary records? When I say outside, at the model layer, I can see that there are customers and orders. Everything relies on the project.yml file that we initially saw, which acts as the config file.
Right.
Here we have stated that anything within the Japel shop folder should be converted to a table until and unless it is explicitly present within staging folder, that should be converted as view. So now, post that execution, earlier post dbt seed command, I was able to see only 3 tables. Now there would be 2 additional tables, the customers and the orders, and there would be 2 views that would be created.
Nice.
So this is the power of dbt. Now, the connection details that I used to connect to the Fabric SQL database was the SQL database endpoint. Was the Fabric SQL database endpoint. Under Fabric SQL database, under connection strings, I was able to get the server name
Yep.
and the database name. Now observe one thing. This is .database.fabric.microsoft.com. Now, Fabric SQL database also provides a SQL analytics endpoint, which is equivalent to the SQL server itself. So in that case, let me copy the SQL connection string and try connecting to this via this analytics endpoint. So for that, there is a file wherein I have to go and update. That is the profiles.yml file. So profiles.yml file acts as the config file that contains connection details to our destination. Since the name is Fabric SQL database for the SQL analytics endpoint, and I am updating the server name, and you all can observe that it's now .datawarehouse.fabric.microsoft.com, and all other connections would remain same. So now let me clear the command line, and then since I have updated the connection string, let me re-establish the connection via dbt debug. This is again trying to establish a connection to the Fabric SQL database, but now via the SQL Analytics endpoint.
Right.
So by the time this is getting connected, okay. So this got connected. Now let's execute the dbt seed command.
Hmm.
So post executing the dbt seed command, I expect the files to be converted within the to the respective tables.
Right.
Correct. But I got an error stating that table hint no lock is not allowed. The reason for that is in Fabric, any SQL Analytics endpoints are read only. They do not support write back. And since in case of dbt seed, we are creating a table and inserting data
Right.
within the table, it failed, stating that it's not supported.
Right.
So, in order to establish a connection to the Fabric SQL database, one has to leverage this Fabric SQL database connection string and not the SQL Analytics endpoint connection string.
Got it. Makes sense. And is that why, if we already have the DBT Fabric adapter, is that why we need the DBT SQL Server adapter? Or is there another reason?
Okay. Now the thing is, Fabric SQL database is more towards is leveraging the engine of the Azure SQL database itself. That is a traditional OLTP structured database. Now the DBT Fabric adapter that is created is for the Fabric warehouse, which is more towards the sign-up serverless version. And as we saw, correct, whenever we execute any DBT command, at the backend within the log file, it auto-generates certain scripts like truncate table. Now, couple of months back, Fabric Warehouse didn't support truncate statement. It only supported delete statement. So the Fabric adapter used to have delete as a statement other than truncate. So
Ah,
one can use dbt Fabric adapter to access the Fabric SQL database, but it would not take the full benefits of the Fabric SQL database or the Azure SQL database engine. So let's test this out. Correct. So in another server, I have installed the dbt Fabric adapter. So let me quickly open the PowerShell here. And again, let me try establishing the connection or update the directory to the corresponding directory. Now, in case if I execute dbt debug, this is a Fabric adapter that I am using. It would
right.
still be able to authenticate and connect to the Fabric SQL database. I would still be able to execute certain commands like dbt seed because
It'll
now
just do it differently.
now it does the same because truncate statement is now supported within the Fabric warehouse as well. Hence it supports. But now in case if I execute dbt run, the statements or the SQL queries that get created in the backend would be as per the Fabric warehouse syntax, and that might not be fully compatible with the Fabric SQL database, thereby leading to certain failures. As we saw, the GitHub repository is the same that I've cloned across the Fabric SQL Server Fabric
Yeah,
adapter and the SQL Server adapter, but in this case it failed because the keyword that I'm using within the SQL file is not compatible with Fabric.
I
Hence, I'll
see.
have to make tweaks within my logic. So, the best bifurcation would be in case if you want to leverage Fabric Warehouse and DBT, then use the DBT Fabric adapter. But in case if one wants to leverage the benefits of DBT tool for Fabric SQL database, best is to leverage the DBT SQL Server adapter. Now, one catch is DBT SQL Server adapter is a community adapter that has been built by the community. Whereas the DBT Fabric adapter has been created by the DBT Labs organization. Hence, initially I stated there are two versions of DBT, correct? A cloud version and a CLI version. The cloud version is a paid version wherein you need a license. And it's only available for the company supported adapters, not the community adapters. So
Ah,
Fabric adapter would have a cloud version and a CLI version. But for Fabric SQL database, since the DBT SQL Server adapter is a community adapter that has been created and maintained by the community, it only has a CLI version. So one
I
has
see.
to set up everything for himself.
I see. Got it. Awesome. Cool. Well, Nana, thanks so much for coming on the show. I learned a lot about DBT, some of the nuances, and some of the great benefits that you can get when we're using this and maybe just getting started. So thanks so much for coming on the show. For our viewers, if you like this episode, go ahead and give it a like, leave us a comment, let us know what you're using DBT for. We'll put some links in the description for you to learn more, and we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed MVP Edition.